be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 45th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets My Little Pony? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of tkepner on fanfiction.net. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. They return to the castle to find the twins sitting in main sitting room, both alternately staring at a stack of gold coins and a small booklet. What's that? One of them looked up, dazed, at Harry's question. Our share of the income from the gender gingers, one of them said. When you brought us that sample made by Zekra, Mr. Rich contacted us. We licensed it for a percentage of the profits. We make less profit per unit, she makes a little, and we don't have to deal with making and distributing them. He set up a manufacturing center here. They returned to staring at the booklet. And is that it? Ron said, wonderingly, as he pointed at the coins stacked all over the table. He knew that a bit was about the same as galleon. He was staring at a fabulous amount of wealth on the table. The rest crowded forward. They had never seen so much gold in one place. Except Harry. He had seen the vaults in the basement of Canterlot Palace, as well as the one in Twilight's palace. One of the twins looked up. That, he said distractedly, glancing at the glittering pile of coins, is what Mr. Rich calls pocket money. It's 1,000 bits. They all gasped. His brother shook his head. That's nothing. Look at this. It's our bank account. Mr. Rich set it up for us to simplify things, he said. Bottom number. He said it was easier than carting around several wagons of bits. Applejack whistled, and pushed back her hat. Rarity fainted. On the fainting couch that suddenly appeared, Rainbow landed with a thud. The others all stared, gobsmacked. Apparently, one of the twins said, in a society where the girls outnumber the boys, changing genders to equalize the numbers in the bedroom is quite popular. He has difficulty keeping up with demand. Imagine that. Twilight chuckled, even as she blushed beet red at the topic. Yes, imagine that. Harry noticed that Rainbow Dash and Applejack were blushing as well, and pointedly not looking at each other. Applejack was studying the floor quite intently and Dash was staring out a window whistling. And their blushes deepened each time they did glance at each other. He hasn't even started on marketing the dragon sneeze sticks, rhyming reeds, hiccup hot mints, farting fudges, or butterscotch hearts. The Weasley parents were exchanging wide-eyed looks. So are, Ron whispered, staring wide-eyed. You can buy the Chudley cannons for less than that. You'll never have to work. His eyes glazed over. Your own Quidditch team. He started to drool. That jolted the twins. Oh, no, said one. That won't do at all, said the other. We have so many other ideas. And Mr. Rich liked the improved gender gingers we showed him. The two stared at each other, grins slowly growing larger. On the other hand, a Quidditch team would be good advertising. The Pegasi seemed quite taken with the game. We could have two, one here and one there. I'm sure some of the retired players would be delighted to teach ponies how to play the game. We could open a store in both that specializes in our stuff. Then they both turned to Sweetie Belle. Don't forget, Sweetie Belle. You're our partner in all this. 1/3 is yours. Sweetie Belle stared at the two twins, then at the booklet still suspended in front of the fillies. Then she imitated her sister. A lot less dramatic, no hoof to the forehead, and no swaying in place on her back 2 legs before tumbling gracefully onto a fainting couch. Her eyes simply rolled up and she went straight down. The adult Weasleys looked almost ready to do the same. Sirius started laughing, sat, then fell over sideways, and continued laughing hysterically. Twilight just looked around, puzzled. Harry just sighed. To her, he knew, they were just bits, right? During the week before the Grangers arrived, the Cutie Mark Crusaders, plus Ron and Ginny, discovered that you cannot make maple syrup in the summer from a walnut tree. While sweet, it just isn't the same. While using a suction bellows did speed up filling the cauldron, there tended to be quite a few drips on the way. Plus, letting go of the handle tended to skewer the accumulated sap at whomever happened to have the misfortune of standing near the spout. Which happened a good deal more frequently than any of them wanted. Harry figured they got maybe half the collected sap into the tray. They ended up wearing most of the remainder. Using a bigger bellows to heat the fire and boil the sap quicker did more to blow the sap out of the tray than anything else. It took 2 days for the non-unicorns just to get the sap out of their coats. And sap in your feathers is a real mess even with 2 of them helping each Pegasus. Not to mention how it threw off their flying. Sweetie Belle did not seem relieved that she could so easily ditch the sap by teleporting. Instead, she seemed a bit jealous of the time Harry spent helping preen Ginny and Scootaloo. The sap did have a slight sugary taste to it, so there was that, at least. The Pegasi didn't seem to mind the sap so much after the first hour. And they only burned down a small storage shed which the adults didn't find out about, fortunately, or they would have been grounded. It took several casts of the Reparo spell to rebuild, and left them all too exhausted to do more than soak in the castle swimming pool the next day, and try to remove the sap. After dinner that night, just as Harry left the dining room, he overheard Sirius say to his mum, "He really is clueless, isn't he?" Then the wizard-turned-pony almost barked out a laugh. "Yes, he is," she said. "You know," he said quietly. Harry turned to listen, just down the hall and out of sight. "Those rings he gave the girls." Harry had to strain his ears. He could imagine his mum tilting her head questioningly. In the old traditions, those rings would be considered betrothal rings. He heard his mum gasp. Which, fortunately, also covered his gasp of shock. Only a suitor would be so concerned about a witch's safety as to give her such protection. Then, surprisingly, he heard his mum laugh. "Well, they are herdmates." He could hear the mirth in her voice. Sirius appeared just as amused. "Giving rings to more than one, which would normally be quite the scandal in England, you know." Harry's mouth dropped open in shock. It didn't take much effort to imagine Sirius smirk. "But the fillies have been telling anyone who asks that you equestrians practice polygamy, herding, as you call it." Harry heard him shift his position. Harry is their hero, so his supporters are more than willing to give him a bit of leeway. And it is legal, by your laws. He laughed, again. "I'm sure some of the old farts are going to be jealous that he gets so many wives, out in the open, while they have to sneak around with their mistresses. Not to mention the mistresses being jealous of being able to be with their wizard in public without censure." He sighed, contentedly. James would be so proud of Harry. Harry heard him stomp his hoof. Not even out of first year. And he's already proposed to 5 witches. And they've all said, yes. He laughed again. They haven't killed him for asking the others to join them. They like being in a herd. He is going to be so henpecked. He laughed again. "From what I've seen, it's a good thing Hogwarts requires separate dorms for the boys and girls, or they'd already be sleeping in one big bed." His mum snickered. "They do enough of that here. And Harry doesn't even realize." Sirius started to laugh again. Oblivious. Completely oblivious. Lily would rap him upside the head for being so oblivious. "I do hope that doesn't mean he's not interested in them," his mum said worriedly. "It would break all their hearts." "Nah, I've seen the way he looks at them when he thinks they aren't looking. He's got it bad, he just doesn't realize what he's feeling." "True, but I still worry." "Bloody Dursleys, the mercurial wizard spat out angrily. With them as examples, he wouldn't know a girl liked him if she walked up to him and said so. Harry could hear him shifting around. Harry began slowly walking down the hall, trying to be as quiet as possible. He had a lot to think over. They liked him like that? They weren't just being friendly. When he thought about it, he could clearly tell the difference between the way the cutie mark crusaders acted around him at Hogwarts and the way other witches did. The same was true here. The fillies, Hermione, and Ginny, all acted differently than the other fillies, not merely like just friends. He didn't have to choose one he liked over the others. How had he never realized that? Especially knowing that multiple partner marriages were common. How could he be so stupid? Did Hermione and Ginny really feel that way, too? He shook his head, befuddled. This would take some time to get sorted. He looked back at the dining room door as he turned the corner. For a moment, he thought he saw some pony ducking back. He stopped and stared. No pony walked out. It must have been his imagination. He shook his head and headed for his room. "You have got to be kidding me," Harry proclaimed on seeing Big Macintosh trying to disguise himself as Apple Bloom's fake female cousin Orchard Blossom at the Sisterhood's social competition. Scootaloo was in hysterics. As were Ginny and Ron when Sweetie Belle clued them in. Harry and the other girls were all at the competition to support their herdmate. Which Harry was still unsure if he should mention anything about that subject. Big Mac had decided to masquerade as Orchard Blossom because, unfortunately, Rarity and Applejack had been called to Manhattan by the cutie map. Apple Bloom had been looking forward to the competition as time with her sister and now she couldn't participate. Hence, Big Mac's dubious decision. Trying to keep a straight face at Big Mac's, no, Orchard Blossom's miscues and mistakes was highly entertaining, and cringeworthy. Still, it was good to see Big Mac and Apple Bloom laughing together at the end of it. He'd been worried her feelings had been hurt. A week before the Weasleys were to return to England, Spike coughed up a missive during breakfast. Catching it expertly from the air, Twilight started to read. "It's from Princess Celestia," Twilight said. She began to dance on her hooves. "She wants us all to come to a meeting in Canterlot this afternoon." Her eyes grew wide and she began breathing heavily. "Why would she want to see me? Is it the portal? Is it Hogwarts? What's gone wrong?" She ran around the table, and stared around frantically. Her saddlebags flew in the door and plopped into place on her back. "I have to hurry." She started out the door, only to be tackled by Harry. "Calm down," he ordered, as Rarity and Applejack had taught him. He started to pet her head with his magic while he clung to her side. He blocked her wings and prevented her from flying out of the room in alarm. She turned her head to look at him. "Deep breaths," he ordered, taking several himself to prompt her. She blinked her eyes and stopped trying to charge out of the room. He cautiously let go of her and started the mantra Rarity had taught him. Spike imitated him in front of her. "Breath in." He held his hoof in front of his chest and brought it in slowly, as he took a deep breath. "Breath out," he instructed, slowly pulling his hoof away as he exhaled. She stared at him for a moment, then sat down. It took a few repetitions, but finally she looked up, a bit apologetically, at every pony's surprised and puzzled expressions. "Sorry," she said. "Sometimes I get a bit excited when Princess Celestia summons me." She hoofed at the floor awkwardly. "It usually means there's an emergency of some kind." Sirius looked around the table. "It can't be that much of an emergency if she wants all of us. Plus, she did say this afternoon and not as soon as possible. Or even immediately," put in Charlie. Twilight nodded slowly. "Yes, plenty of time." She chewed her lower lip a moment, staring out the room's window. "We could either go now through a flow, and then wait around in Canterlot for the afternoon, or wait around here, then take the flow after lunch," she tentatively suggested. They could tell which one she preferred. The Grangers and adult Weasleys exchanged glances. Maybe we could take in the sights in Canterlot while we wait, suggested Bill. Oh, said Ginny, can we see the castle? Myrtle and Hermione looked just as excited. The last time Myrtle had been here they had been too involved with the ball to really act like tourists. So it was that they arrived at Canterlot's Flo station, beside the train station, barely 15 minutes later. They had to hold Twilight back from immediately running to the castle. Simmer down, thar, Applejack said. The princess said this afternoon. She probably has something else she's doing now and you just be gettin' in her way. After the obligatory security check that she really was Princess Twilight, and they were ponies, a guard was sent ahead with word that they would be at the palace at noon. They then spent the time until lunch seeing the sights. Harry and the fillies had already seen them before, but it was fun watching newcomers' reactions to the many appealing things around the city. Not to mention, the city itself. Ponyville had accustomed them to seeing crowds of ponies, but there was no preparing them for the actual numbers they now saw. The adults knew that only the World Quidditch matches back home could compare in numbers, and that was for only a few days. This was an entire, permanent city of magical and cute ponies that clearly outnumbered all of England's wizards and witches. And it was built into the side of a mountain. Even the Grangers were amazed at the sight. The castle left the newcomers speechless. While the ministry was opulently appointed, it couldn't hold a candle to Castle Canterlot, marble gleaming in the bright sun, with its huge hallways, stained glass windows, and bustling, happy workers. The guards posted everywhere were also an eye-catcher. As were the random security checks. They had barely entered when the major domo, and a palace aide, trotted up and bowed. Princess Sparkle, Prince Harry, Princesses Celestia and Luna request you attend them in the royal family dining room for lunch, the major domo said. Sharp ear, he glanced sideways at his companion, will show your guests to the green dining room. The meeting will take place in the green reception room afterwards, at 1. Sharp ear straightened and started down the hall, with a glance. To make sure the others were following him. I hope you enjoy the cuisine. It's made by the best chefs in the country, the major domo said proudly as Myrtle, Sirius, the Grangers, and the Weasleys passed him. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to ask Sharp Ear. A few minutes later, led by their guide, Harry and his mum walked into the dining room. Princess Celestia was already seated there and, to their surprise, so was Princess Luna. It is good to see you, my most faithful student, Princess Celestia said warmly, and smiled broadly. Princess Luna nodded her agreement as she put back her cup of tea. Or was it coffee? Whatever the emergency was, if there was an emergency, Harry knew it couldn't be all that serious. Except, if it wasn't an emergency, why was Princess Luna here? What's wrong? His mum said anxiously, prancing to the table. Is it the portal? Has some pony else tried to sneak through? Are the Griffins upset that we waited so long to notify them? Are the dragons upset with Charlie Weasley's questions? Harry nervously followed more slowly in her wake. He'd rather be with the fillies and the others than in here. He eyed the two princesses cautiously. Nothing of the sort, my dear Twilight, Celestia said soothingly. We actually wanted to speak with Harry. She looked over at him, exuding calm and warmth, and her sister copied her. Harry almost bolted from the room, shrinking back a little on his rear hooves, and crouching slightly for better traction in a sprinting start, futile though it might be. Celestia smirked. You have done nothing wrong, little colt. We wanted to thank you for what you have done for us this last year at Hogwarts. Your attendance at that school has taught us a great deal about the world on the other side of the portal. If you had stayed in Ponyville, we fear we, and the rest of Equestria, would have found ourselves at a severe disadvantage when the witches and wizards revealed themselves to us. There is much of importance that they have hidden from the non-magicals. We would have blundered into a situation that was very dangerous, Luna stated bluntly. When you and Twilight first went through the portal, all we knew about these witches was that they had a school called Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, headed by an individual named Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, as I'm sure you remember. Celestia continued. He, apparently, based on the letter, was also a member of the Order of Merlin, a first class, a grand sorcerer, a chief warlock, a supreme mugwump, and International Confederation of Wizards. We had no idea what any of those really meant, at the time. She sipped from her cup as Twilight and Harry slowly took places at the table. Harry made sure his mum was between him and the princesses. However, the mention of an international confederation implied at least some type of organization. That it is international means there is a national government. What it did and how it worked was unknown, Luna said, before taking a bite of her dandelion sandwich. All of this conjecture was based on a single letter delivered by an owl. An owl. Celestia shook her head as his mum nodded. On the other hoof, we knew quite a lot about the non-magical humans and how they conducted their governmental affairs, trade, and society in general thanks to you and your World Almanac. Celestia nodded to Harry and smiled gratefully. The book was a tremendous help in that respect. And, we noted, it made no mention of a magically oriented society. That was our first warning, Luna interjected. The humans are a lot like Griffin's predators, as we could see from the crime statistics and numerous wars reported in the almanac. Which seem to mirror the Griffinstone society to some degree. Only the humans are more socially organized and less aggressive individually. The humans have hundreds of nations, and every type of government possible. Some we had never imagined, she said admiringly. Fortunately, the nation in which the portal resides, England, appeared a peaceful one and seemed friendly to outsiders by their standards. So, we were cautiously optimistic. We wished to explore the possibilities of trade with the humans. Their telephone, television, computer, transportation, and manufacturing industries were true eye-openers. Their advancements in physics, math, and chemistry also were well worth examining. All leading to possible innovations in our own world. Harry frowned, listening closely. But what about the other portal, the one Twilight went through when Sunset Shimmer stole her crown? The princess shook her head. It opens only for 3 days every 2.5 years, our time, and once every 10 months for 3 days, their time. Far too long a gap to establish reliable trade with their world. Plus, the time differential would be a major problem. Just ordering and getting books would take longer than 3 days. And that would have to wait until after we had exchanged our bits for their currency, which, itself would take at least a day or two. Plus, it would take years just to get the local authorities and experts to believe that it wasn't all an elaborate hoax. And we could not, in good conscience, order our little ponies into a situation where they had no backup for such long periods of time while separating them from their loved ones. Or giving the locals the appearance of an invasion. She sighed. And the last time we looked through the portal, 350 years ago, our technologies were comparable. She shook her head. Setting that aside, we decided to keep the existence of this portal, and Equestria, a secret from these witches and wizards until we understood a bit more about them and their place in the world you came from. She gave Harry a steady look, then turned to her meal. After a moment, she continued. That there was virtually no mention of a society of magic users, even as fables, in the non-magical human books we had imported and read in those first few days, made us even more cautious. Would they be a threat to you, Harry, or us? Fortunately, Minerva McGonagall showed up in reply to the letter you and Twilight sent. The Ministry of Magic, from what she said, governs the English witch kind, and is primarily interested in protecting their secrecy from the Muggles, those without magic. You may not realize it, but practically everything the Ministry does is aimed at that goal. Their primary laws and regulations are all framed with the goal to keep their society a secret, not international relations or actually governing their people. She shook her head in disbelief. They have developed many spells to facilitate that goal. They treat the non-magicals as annoying and bumbling beasts. Some witches even go as far as to completely ignore the non-magicals, and consider them of little consequence, as if they were mere animals. Luna snorted and shook her head. It is never a good idea to ignore a potential threat, or underestimate a potential foe. And the whole reason for their hiding was fear of how they would be destroyed if they weren't hidden from these inconsequential creatures. This was amply illustrated by Twilight and her friends visiting the Weasley family home, at Chief Warlock Albus Dumbledore's behest. That family's ignorance of the simplest non-magical tools nearly matched the Grangers' ignorance of magic. Their condescending attitude toward non-witchkind was clearly visible. Chief Warlock Dumbledore knew of our non-English origins. His reactions were quite informative. That he did not follow up on that first meeting with Princess Sparkle with more was puzzling. It was very interesting that he failed to contact anyone else in his government for them to contact us. Or, if he did, they made no attempt to continue any communications. That was our second warning, put in Luna. Based on what we learned from the Weasleys, and others, in our first weeks of contact, mainly their attitudes towards non-magical beings and non-humans, we were very wary. Until we learned more of these witches, we did not want to reveal our true origins, or the portal. They might decide we were not worthy of being treated as equals. Luna nodded. And picked up the explanation so her sister could eat. Ignoring the non-magicals and trading only with witchkind, about whom we knew very little at the time, would make us negligent in our duties. Especially as the witches seemed stuck at least 100 years behind in societal and technical development compared to the non-magicals. It made far more sense to contact the non-magicals, as they seemed to have more to offer in the way of trade goods and knowledge. We decided to continue our plans for an embassy with the non-magical government of the United Kingdom. And, in view of the magicals' longing for secrecy, officially, we would simply pretend that there were no witches or wizards. If anyone were to see any signs of magic being used, they could assume it as being ours. We could do no less while obeying the strictures of their international statute of wizarding secrecy. By claiming it as ours, we honored their law and protected them from exposure while still pursuing our own goals without impediment. Furthermore, unlike the non-magicals, the witches and wizards have no office for us to contact as a nation. From what we could gather, after reading many of their books on the subject, the only department to deal with non-English witchkind is the Department of International Magical Cooperation. It works with the magical governments of other countries to set standards for international trade, interpret international magical laws, and work with the Department of Magical Games and Sports. All these departments work directly with their counterparts in the other nations. While we wanted to explore trade with witchkind, at this juncture we were still learning what they had to offer and what they might want from us. Trying to establish standards before we even knew what our little ponies wanted to trade was silly. Sports was also an interesting area to explore, but we were definitely not at a level where we wanted to send sports teams back and forth through the portal, so that office, too, could not help us. There simply isn't a way to actually meet with the Ministry of Magic in an official capacity outside of those areas. Attempts by our wizard solicitor at direct communication with the Minister of Magic were rebuffed, just as they were in the non-magical government. Having no official standing or powerful sponsors meant they dismissed our requests for a meeting. The humans are quite like dragons in that respect. Both governments did offer to set an appointment in the next year, with the proviso that it might be cancelled should something more important show up. However, unlike the non-magicals, the witches in the Ministry of Magic gave heavy hints that anything would be more important. That Chief Warlock Dumbledore did not step forward and offer his assistance was our third warning, Luna said dryly. The International Confederation of Wizards was also problematic. One had to already have a contact with the ICW to approach it. If you weren't invited, you couldn't even find them. But the books we acquired were quite emphatic about how insular witchkind is. Based on the various Dark Lords that we read about, we decided to withhold information until we had a better understanding of the current political climate. Which we discovered was not very friendly towards non-English, non-magical, non-human beings. If they treated half-humans so coldly, how would they treat us, as complete aliens? She snorted in disgust. In fact, we worried that when witchkind learned of our goals, they might react violently, said Celestia. Which they did when Miss Skeeter announced her visit to Equestria in their newspaper, Luna said dryly. Fortunately, Prince Blueblood was able to forestall any actual bloodshed, although a few spells were tossed around. Witchkind's very arrogance prevented any real conflict. They simply could not conceive that anyone would actually be able to resist them. She looked at Harry significantly. With your help, we were able to prepare the battlefield adequately beforehand. Harry stared at the two rulers, appalled, his mouth hanging open. There had been a magical battle between Equestria and the Ministry. So, we wish to say, thank you, Harry Potter, for the services you have rendered to Equestria, said Celestia. Your attending Hogwarts opened up the reclusive world of the witches and wizards, and allowed us to prepare ourselves, and establish allies, for the possibility of a conflict. We know you were reluctant to attend the school in the first place, making your attendance even more important to us. The two sisters exchanged looks. We are confident we would not have been too indisposed by the witches if the assault had been unanticipated, but the non-magicals would have seen the results of our defending ourselves and thought we were attacking them. It would have become quite problematical, Luna said. We might have had to destroy the portal. Celestia smiled. While you are too young to receive any titles, we will be giving you an estate with a modest income. If Harry's eyes bugged out any farther, he was sure they would fall out. Luna snickered. Although Sweetie Belle's SEC licorices will earn you more than enough to live on, I'm sure. He felt his face heat up as he blushed. Even the princesses had noticed. Celestia snorted, and grinned, before continuing, there will be a ball in your honor, Saturday, this week. You may bring your herdmates, and their families, with you. There was a brief pause as Celestia delicately consumed another slice of cake. Then she said, we would like you to think about returning with your herdmates to Hogwarts next year. Without the interference of a certain evil wizard in the last 5 weeks, it would have been a rather pleasant experience, we think. She glanced at him under her eyelashes. At least your letters prior to those incidents seem to indicate so. And you will have plenty of company, this time, Luna said. We have 37 students, 7 unicorn, 13 Pegasi and 17 Earth who wish to attend and explore this new magic. They are quite excited at being Equestria's first exchange students, after you and your herdmates. They are, we believe, the brightest and bravest Equestria has to offer. They, and their parents, moved to embassy housing in Little Whinging at the beginning of the month, to acclimatize to walking on 2 legs, and learn a bit about the culture and its expectations of appropriate conduct. Headmaster Dumbledore, just Friday, confirmed that their Hogwarts letters will arrive on schedule. There are also 10 unicorns, 6 Pegasi, 6 Earth ponies, and a zebrakin who have volunteered to be teaching assistants to the staff, at our expense, Celestia added. They were gratefully accepted by Dumbledore as he was having difficulty finding sufficient witches and wizards for the positions and funds. They have been undergoing a crash course in magic since you left for Hogwarts last year. This will give us the opportunity to see how accurate our understanding of their magic is. Luna smirked and gave Twilight a steady look. It seems your offer at the end of your feast significantly depleted their labor pool. Harry looked up at his mum, who smiled at him as she lifted her teacup. More students? And staff members who were ponies? Yes, Celestia cheerfully said. We've had nearly 1,000 new Pegasi and several hundred new unicorns come through the portal. There were nearly as many inquiries at the embassy about tourist arrangements. And we believe many of the Pegasi will opt to move here, permanently. She finished another slice of cake. Naturally, Celestia solemnly said, we don't expect you to answer immediately. But you can expect a second-year letter to arrive next week while you are visiting the Weasleys at their home. You will need to decide by your birthday. Harry's attention drifted off. He ate, slowly, as he considered what to do. First, of course, was talking this over with the fillies. Then the 4 of them needed to talk with both Ginny and Hermione. That was the real issue, though, wasn't it? If he stayed home, he wouldn't see either of those 2 fillies for the next year. He doubted they'd be willing to give up their education at Hogwarts. Plus, Scootaloo, Apple Bloom, and Ginny not being unicorns meant they couldn't attend Princess Celestia's school for gifted unicorns. In addition, the schools to teach wand magic in Equestria were still being debated and designed, according to his mum. It was as they were finishing dessert, and the adults were talking about how the different nations around Equestria were reacting to the existence of the portal and the humans on the other side, that he heard Twilight ask, "Have you shown the Griffins the new recipes using tofu?" "The tofu experiment was a failure," Celestia said sadly, shaking her head. Then she giggled, which turned into laughter. In retrospect, Luna said, it was a mistake to use candles in the chandeliers, instead of the normal lighting crystals. She glanced up. "We thought they might find it a reminder of their home, and that we weren't as different as some said." She shook her head as she valiantly tried to suppress a broad smile, and failed. "We were trying to make the Griffins feel more at home, you see," Celestia said, interspaced with giggles. "They are always so formal with us." A guard burst out of the dinner conference and screamed, "Medic, medic," before collapsing a few steps later, gagging uncontrollably. Several other ponies ran out after him, also gagging uncontrollably. A moment later, there was a soft thump from the room and a light yellow flame flicked out into the hallway before disappearing. The guards posted in the hallway rapidly slipped gas masks on and unshipped their weapons and removed the safeties. They quickly dropped into well-practiced positions and routines. Some charged towards the conference room, some covered those from the sides and above, while the remainder prepared for an assault from either end of the corridor. Voices could be heard from inside. "Open the windows. Open the windows. For Celestia's sake, open the windows," they begged. Several guards rushed in the doors, prepared to protect their fellow ponies. Slightly singed equestrian and Griffinstone diplomats made their way into the hall. All their faces were putrid colors and they were gagging from the horrendous odor that had begun to waft into the hall. The recovering pony diplomats and servers in the hall screamed again, and began fleeing, as best they could manage, away from the Griffins. One of the Griffins groaned and grabbed his stomach. There was a loud "brapp." Another followed a moment later and then another. He had barely straightened when a second Griffin in the delegation groaned and started to copy the first one. One of the guard ponies, who had been standing outside the doors when they burst open, and was now helping a pony to stand, froze. Despite the charms on his armor that made all guards look alike, he, impressively, turned green. He staggered and almost fell, dropping the pony he had been helping. Pegasi at the end of the hall began furiously fanning their wings, trying to clear the corridor. The Griffinstone diplomats were hurriedly escorted, at shouting distance, down the hall and outside into the garden. Minutes later, dozens of birds and animals were seen fleeing the garden and seeking refuge inside the palace. The gardeners later discovered several species that they didn't even know were anywhere near Canterlot, cowering under various pieces of furniture and hiding in the drapes. "The Griffins almost declared war on the humans when I explained where we got the recipes from," Celestia said, before bursting into laughter, again. Luna shook her head. "We really can't blame the humans, however. The tofu recipes did say they caused some flatulence." Celestia's laughter pealed through the room. "Some flatulence? That's like calling Niagara Falls a small set of rapids." "Still," Luna said, "we should have tested it before hoof." She sighed and picked at her salad. "And tofu is now a banned chemical weapon," Luna said. At the Griffin's insistence. The grin she was sporting spoiled the seriousness of what she was saying. "I have never seen a trade delegation so quickly come to an agreement. They were done and headed back in 2 days." Celestia finally had her giggles under control. "But it is the first time I've seen Griffins preferring to eat vegetables instead of meat at our banquets. Although," Luna said speculatively, "I did see Prince Red Talon surreptitiously getting the recipe from the kitchens. He murmured something about getting back at a sibling." Celestia began to laugh uncontrollably, and eventually fell over sideways. Luna sighed. "The health inspectors have condemned the conference room." Celestia had started to turn blue, and her laughter had subsided into wheezing. Which oddly sounded like she was trying to say, "best conference ever." Princess Celestia had managed to regain her composure when they met the others in the green reception room. They sat on the couches and armchairs tastefully arranged by the windows looking out across Equestria. After making sure everyone was comfortable, and greeting them all by name, Princess Celestia said, "We wanted to tell you in person of our decision on the Peter Pettigrew matter." Sirius immediately sat up straight, all trace of good humor gone from his expression. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the princess. Peter Pettigrew readily admitted his part in the death of Harry Potter's natural parents and the attempt on his life. "And well he should," growled Sirius, the traitorous rat. He visibly restrained himself from jumping up to storm around the room. Celestia nodded gravely. He also explained that he had joined the Death Eaters, as Tom Riddle called his followers, because they had threatened both him and his mother. He thought the Ministry and Dumbledore's followers would lose the Civil War, and he would be killed for being a half-BLD and defying Riddle. He agreed to take their mark on the condition that his mother would be spared their attention. He said that if he had refused they would have made him watch as they tortured his mother to death, and then they would have done the same to him. He should have refused, and died like a man, declared Sirius, hoofing at the floor angrily. "Not everyone had as contentious a relationship with their parents as you did," Princess Celestia rebuked the wizard. "And I cannot too harshly condemn a pony for trying to stay alive in such turbulent times." She turned her head and looked out over the city. He could have asked for help. Sirius yelled as he stood, stiff-legged, sparks popping from his horn. The guards in the corners of the room jockeyed for better line of sights and brought weapons up. Harry saw a unicorn's horn start to glow lightly. "All the history books agree, you were losing to Riddle," Celestia said sternly. Even in school, 2 years before he attacked Harry and his parents, it was becoming obvious that he would win. Could you have guaranteed Peter and his mother's safety when Tom controlled the Ministry? She raised an eyebrow. Sirius' furious blush. "I think not. It was a terrible choice he had to make. Afterwards, he had to do many things he never would have done otherwise." She looked back at Sirius. "This does not excuse what he did, but it does explain it. He betrayed James." Sirius yelled at her furiously. "And if he hadn't, they would have killed him, and his mother," slowly. She answered serenely. "He has begged forgiveness." "It's a trick," the wizard cried. "Your emotions drive your hatred. You want to believe that only someone of unredeemable evil could betray you and your friends." She sighed. "He isn't as strong-willed a person as you are, Sirius. He fears for his life, and lives with that fear daily. Even when he was with the Weasleys, he feared discovery on a daily basis." Sirius gritted his teeth and scowled darkly. He still should have refused. He angrily sat back down. "Perhaps." She nodded gracefully. Riddle told him he had no interest in killing James and Lily, he only wanted to kill the baby. Peter considered the life of the baby a fair exchange for his mother's life. She paused a second. After all, the Potters could always have another baby. He couldn't have another mother. He wanted to believe James and Lily would survive. They might hate him for being the instrument of their baby's death, but they would be alive. The wizard was shaking his head violently, muttering, "No. No. No." He didn't want to hear this, clearly. He suspected he was being lied to, but he had hoped he was wrong. She turned her head and looked at the Weasleys, who were all listening, wide-eyed. "He hid with you, the Weasley family, for 10 years. He pretended to be a simple rat." She nodded as they shuddered in revulsion at the thought. "He was afraid to allow anyone to know he was alive because Riddle's followers wanted him dead. He knew that he would be blamed by them, that they would think he had led their MSTR into a trap. And, based on what happened to the Longbottoms, he knew they wouldn't stop until they caught him, if they knew he was alive. So, he stayed a rat. With a witch family so he would have warning if anyone suspected him alive, and to keep tabs on his fellow Death Eaters. He didn't betray you, he didn't take advantage of his position." She stared at the Weasleys steadily, and tried to impress upon them that truth. And he could have. At night, when you were asleep, he could have transformed and cast controlling spells with impunity. Or done things and used the obliviate spell. You were at his mercy. By the widening of the adult's eyes, and the shudders that ran through their bodies, she knew that they hadn't really considered seriously what his hiding with them meant. But he didn't. He stayed a rat. He left you all unmolested, both physically and mentally. She nodded reassuringly. So, he isn't evil. He is just a wizard who had to make terrible choices. She shifted slightly to address them all and adopted a more formal tone. Peter Pettigrew has committed many crimes on the other side of the portal. The only crime he committed in Equestria was being brought in by force. He was not trying to evade our laws to sneak in. He attempted to escape his cage many times without success before even approaching the portal. We cannot condemn him for the disturbance at the portal when he was clearly attempting to avoid it. The Weasley family, in turn, did not know their pet rat was a wizard hiding in his animagus form, and similarly did not willfully nor knowingly break any equestrian laws. However, he is responsible, indirectly, for the deaths of Prince Harry Potter's parents, and we cannot ignore that crime, even if it was committed in a territory outside our borders, long before he became a part of our family. Princess Luna started speaking. We have examined his dreams as carefully as possible over the last few weeks and believe the wizard to be truthful and honest in his motives. He has agreed to cooperate with us in determining exactly how the dark mark used by Riddle operates, and to come up with a spell to detect it should anyone with it cross through the portal in the future. In addition, everything we have learned will be shared with the proper authorities on the other side of the portal, Celestia said. Sirius scowled darkly, his legs twitched with the longing to get up and storm around the room. That the guards watched him closely seemed to temper down his physical reactions. During our first investigations, Peter promised to tell the truth in exchange for sanctuary from punishment in England for his crimes. He followed through admirably, volunteering much information about how Tom Riddle acted and planned, and identified many of that wizard's followers, both marked and unmarked. It is our turn to reciprocate that trust, Celestia said. He will be sentenced to 20 years in the dungeons, reduced to house arrest in Philadelphia based on his continued cooperation and good behavior. He will be tutored on equestrian history and mores. Should the psychologists, and Princess Luna, agree, he will be eligible for early release in 2 years. In time, he might become a valuable member of society and atone for the evil deeds he did in England. Sirius again shot to his hooves and opened his mouth to protest. The guards moved a bit closer and the Pegasus moved to flank the wizard. Luna raised an eyebrow. Princess Celestia didn't overtly move or respond as she stared intently at the wizard, but it suddenly grew much warmer in the room. Every pony could feel her power fill the room. Sirius looked startled, then his expression went blank. He blinked and his anger seemed to drain away. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then said, "Excuse my outburst, Your Highness." He blinked, then continued, "As you said, my emotions on this matter are quite strong." He bowed his head. "I meant no disrespect. Please forgive me." She nodded regally. Emotions in such cases as this tend to be nearly overwhelming for those involved. You need not concern yourself regarding your conduct today. Just keep that rat away from me, he muttered, and looked down at the floor as he once more sat. Luna smirked. "We shall endeavor to ensure you never meet." A wave of cool air seemed to flow through the room. Princess Celestia smirked, as well. "On a more cheerful note, we would like to extend an invitation to all of you to attend a ball next Saturday. It's being held to honor Prince Harry Potter's service in introducing the witching world to Equestria, and preventing conflict." She grinned at Harry's blushing face. He shuffled his forehooves awkwardly as everyone looked at him. "We're sure he and Princess Twilight will be able to explain the details," Luna said. "Now, then," Celestia said briskly, "have you enjoyed your vacation in Equestria?" She looked expectantly at the Weasleys and Grangers. The conversation went for another half hour before the two sisters excused themselves. Celestia went to afternoon court, Luna headed for bed. Sundown isn't until 8 o'clock tonight, so I hope to get in a good 7-hour nap before raising the moon, she said as she left the room. Please enjoy your stay tonight in the castle. They spent the rest of the day being tourists. They did not, however, spend the entire afternoon in the Canterlot Royal Library, as Twilight and Hermione wanted to do. Good morning, Princess Sparkle, the headmaster said as she stepped through his flue. I have managed an arrangement with the goblins, he continued as she sat down opposite him. They have agreed to search for banned objects in the vaults of known Death Eaters currently in Azkaban. In exchange, Sirius Black has agreed to let the goblins search his family's vault and remove any goblin-made items they might find, as well as pay a large fine for his family failing to return the items in a timely manner. Dumbledore looked at Twilight over his glasses. As he assured me, they were very happy to make the arrangement. The Blacks have been hoarding goblin items for centuries. Twilight smiled hopefully. The number of Death Eaters in Azkaban is low, fortunately, only 10. Of those, only 7 were members of Riddle's inner circle. 3 are in the same family, the Lestranges, followed by Misters Rowell, Rookwood, Mulciber, and Dolohov. The goblins have refused to let us enter any of the vaults, nor will they remove anything. However, should they find anything that might be a Horcrux, they have agreed to bring it to the vault door for us to examine. If it is a Horcrux, they will allow us to watch as they destroy the Horcrux as a banned item. The vault owner will be fined 10% of the value of the vault. If there is any collateral damage to the vault owner will be fined a minimum of 10% of the original value of the vault, or 1,000 galleons, whichever is greater. He stood and gestured at the flue. Shall we? 2 hours later, they were still standing outside the massive door leading to the Lestrange family vault deep below Gringotts. Being the largest vault, and accessible to 3 inner circle Death Eaters, they had decided to search it first. It was crammed with coins, goblets, and armor in both gold and silver. There were the skins of strange winged and serpentine creatures, jeweled flasks with mysterious liquids, and even a crown on a skull. The goblin team had long since vanished from sight inside as they searched for the cup. The princess and headmaster had spent most of the time discussing how they would integrate the new professors and students into the school. The students would almost double the size of the incoming class, which would increase class sizes dramatically. But with 2 assistants assigned to each class, the doubled workload would actually be less than before. In an effort to keep the class sizes down to a manageable number, they decided that the best solution would be to split the classes. There would be an A and a B class, where the more skilled students went to the A class. The classes would be in adjoining rooms. The professors and their assistants would swap classes on a weekly basis, so that the professors would be familiar with all the students in their subjects, and to make sure that the students received proper instruction. There would be a mandatory class, once a week in the evenings, for the equestrians, about wizard-kind traditions and their society. It would be open to other interested students. Twilight had just drawn up a proposed schedule for the first-year students when a goblin motioned to them from inside the vault. Twilight didn't need more than a moment's look at the cup. That's it, she said. Definitely the same magical signature. She turned to look at the headmaster. And it is definitely the third, as well. Ring, tiara, cup, locket, and Harry. If those 5 are all he made, then we are finished. The goblin's eyes grew wide at hearing the list. The headmaster nodded and reached inside his robes. He removed a small wooden case and opened it. Inside was a glass tube with a basilisk fawn. He offered the case to the goblin. We have discovered that basilisk venom is more than capable of rendering a Horcrux useless, he said. The box has a stasis charm to prevent the venom from destroying the container. Use only magic to handle the fawn. The goblin scowled at him. Do you think me a simpleton? He gestured at another goblin and casually dropped the priceless artifact on the floor of the cave. Albus stared sadly at Helga Hufflepuff's cup, shaking his head sorrowfully at the desecration of such a priceless relic. The goblin studied the wooden box for a moment, then barked an order. The second goblin ran over and jumped into the vault cart, and then shot out of sight. The goblin's search team returned and began clearing the area around the cup. Then they began stacking all manner of heirlooms and expensive keepsakes around it. Portraits, clothes, books, and other combustible items were placed closest. Things that could not burn, but were delicate enough to be susceptible to fire or explosions were ranked next. The mound was barely inside the vault's doorframe. Princess Sparkle looked at Albus questioningly. He sighed. Goblins dislike wizards, considering most to be thieves and the remainder to be thieves in training. I am sure they hope that the Horcrux is as violent as I told them. He nodded at the massive mound of flammable materials. This is their way of getting even. Plus, if vault is damaged, they can assess fines based the destruction wrought. We should probably move to a safer location. He moved a bit down the path outside the vault, facing the doorframe at a sharp angle. They watched in silence as the mound grew wider and taller, until it blocked access to the vault. Finally came the sound of the vault cart returning. The driving goblin didn't wait for the cart to stop before he bounded out and handed gloves to the leader. The leader of the group put them on, then opened the tube with the Fong. He shook Fong onto the glove and began climbing the vault doorframe. The other goblins raced out of the vault and down the path, pressing against the wall, well out of the way of the doorway to the vault. Twilight and Albus hurriedly imitated them until they could only see the doorframe and the climbing goblin. A few minutes later, the goblin was at the ceiling and over the Horcrux. He took careful aim, threw the Fong, and then threw himself outside the open vault, as close to the wall as he could manage and putting the thick cave wall between himself and it. The Horcrux had no time to react, it simply exploded in a wave of pressure and heat. As planned, the items around the Horcrux were covered in flames. The goblins made no attempts to put out the fires raging around the entrance to the vault. They just laughed and made jokes as portraits yelled, screamed, and perished. Twilight started to step forward, horrified at the willful destruction, but Albus lightly touched her arm and shook his head. Once the flames died down, they were able to get close enough to see the ruined cup lying in the center of a large blackened area, the basilisk Fong slowly eating a hole in the floor. The Horcrux was gone. The lead goblin retrieved the Fong, placed it back in its tube, and then into the wooden box that had held it. He handed the box to Albus and then returned to the vault opening. He stroked the scorch marks on the frame lovingly and stared at the hole etched into the floor by the Fong. Yes, he murmured. He turned to face Albus. You see the damage there? He asked, obviously rhetorically. We will have to repair it. There will be a fine of 10% on the vault's contents because of this damage. Albus could hear a goblin at the back of the group snicker. Without any further ceremony, the goblins closed the vault door. You will search the other vaults, the wizard asked as they headed for the vault cart. While we only knew of 5 Horcruxes, there is the possibility that there were 1 or more created before them. Albus and Twilight could only hope there were no more Horcruxes. The goblin scowled. Of course. The agreement was to search 5 vaults. Unlike wizards, we keep to our agreements. Then he looked back at the scorch marks on the frame of the door. He smiled, besides, we might find something else that explodes. He looked happy at the thought of doing more damage to a wizard's belongings and pocketbook. Albus nodded and joined Twilight in the cart for the return trip to the surface. If the goblins didn't find anything else of concern, Albus planned to have Harry throw the box containing Tom Riddle's wraith through the veil of death in the Ministry while he was visiting the Weasleys. Naturally, Albus and Princess Sparkle would be prepared in the event the box shattered and released the wraith instead of passing through the veil. Which would mean that there definitely was another Horcrux for them to hunt. They would just recapture the wraith and keep it sequestered until they found that last Horcrux. Otherwise, that would be the end of Tom Riddle. Happily, for Albus, Harry would be spending the next few weeks at the Weasleys. Plus, he knew the Longbottom boy had invited him for a birthday party. Then, after getting his letter, he would be wandering through Diagon Alley getting his supplies for second year. Parading Harry through the alley multiple times, and having him visit a few of his friends, would be a tremendous boost to reassure Dumbledore's followers that the boy intended to be a part of the wizarding world. At least until he finished his newts. Hopefully, even longer. Professor Lupin was Sirius Black's best friend, and had a pale face with premature lines, and light brown hair. He was also quite tall, standing 6 feet, 2 inches. Sirius had accompanied Harry Potter Sparkle and his herdmates over to Equestria, which most wizards and witches called Atlantis, at the end of their first school year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Except for Sirius, the rest had been returning to their homes. They were also returning to their natural forms in Equestria as unicorns, pegasi, or earth ponies. The portal changed wizards and witches into unicorns. Squibs, those with too little magic to use a wand and be a wizard or witch, became pegasi. People totally without magic. They stayed people, just to be confusing. Remis had stayed behind to finish off some of the loose ends regarding grades, schedules, and planning for the next term. He also had to make more permanent arrangements for being absent from his home not only for most of the summer halls, but also for the coming school year. As a result, he was delayed until the middle of July, almost in time for the full moon. Full moons were a problem for Remis Lupin. He had a condition that made it very difficult for him to function at those times. The days before he was always more irritable and touchier about what people said or did around him. The days after, he was usually very tired and depressed. The night of the full moon could be quite violent, if he wasn't extremely careful. Not much unlike what most women go through once a month, but much, much worse. That had been lessened, somewhat, by him finally having access to the new potion that held those things to a minimum wolfsbane potion. It tasted terrible, and had a regimen requiring its use for a full week before the full moon. Missing even one dose made it useless. Remis, to his misfortune, was a werewolf. The professor had been one of those invited to visit Ponyville over the summer halls. Mainly, so he and Sirius could work out a few of their differences in a neutral location. Sirius had spent almost 10 years in Azkaban, the terrifying wizard prison, without being charged with a crime. He had been thought to be guilty of betraying his best friend and his best friend's wife in service to a dark wizard. Remis had been convinced of his guilt, and never sought the truth. Sirius, despite being good friends with Remis, had thought him in service to the dark wizard. Their first meeting, months before, in the wizarding world had started awkwardly, moved to yelling, and ended with both sobbing on each other's shoulders. The only reason their reunion hadn't dissolved into spellfire, first, had been because their friends had relieved them of their wands. However, Sirius had many medical appointments with mind healers. His long imprisonment in Azkaban, the wizarding prison staffed with creatures that inspired despair and hopelessness in the prisoners, had done untold damage to his psyche. It would take years of therapy before he could be said to have recovered, not that he wouldn't have lingering effects for the rest of his life. Long-term false imprisonment took a toll no matter who one was. Especially in Azkaban. Complicating things since then, of course, had been that Remis had to live at the castle during the school year, and his duties there severely limited his opportunities to meet with his old friend. Which was why they wanted to get together over the summer. Remis had prepared as well as he could for travel to Equestria. His luggage consisted almost entirely of a small bag that fit easily in his pocket. He knew that clothes would not be a problem, as most ponies in Equestria never bothered, and why should they? They were already wearing fur coats. So, he packed his toothbrush, a camera, a few other incidentals, and that was it. Passing through the Equestrian embassy, and the 3 security checkpoints, he found very interesting. Most of those in the embassy were ponies, with a smattering of those in human form, plus human visitors and employees. The checkpoints to the portal, however, each had 6 well-armed guards, 3 human and 3 pony. It was rather intimidating, actually, especially as the ponies were all equipped with saddle-mounted miniguns. Astonishingly, they managed to make sure every traveler, muggle or magical, was discreetly scanned for illusions, polyjuice, animagus, and other magical methods of fooling people into thinking you were someone you weren't. No one would be sneaking in or out of Equestria. The scans were extended to their clothes and possessions, too, and included a few spells he had never heard of or seen before. There was even a checkpoint immediately before the portal itself. The Muggles never noticed the magic. The equestrian scheme to hide all their magic use under the term of highly advanced technology was paying off, as the non-magicals uniformly misinterpreted the magic they did see. The pretend tech devices they waved around or had people stand in front of were more than enough to fool the Muggles. It was quite clever, he had to admit to himself. To his dismay, however, his arrival in Equestria was not without drama. He collapsed almost immediately after transiting the portal, convulsing on the ground, for several minutes. Then he passed out. As he later learned, now that he was a unicorn like all the other wizards and witches to come through the portal, no one knew what the problem was. Their doctors did the best they could to stabilize his condition, and quickly moved him into quarantine in the portal hospital. He woke briefly, in his room, only to once more go into convulsions just moments later. Before any pony could get into the room, he passed out, again. Sirius, Harry, his herdmates, and his friends had quickly gathered in the waiting room for news on the wizard who was either a friend or their professor. By this time, they had both doctors from Equestria and healers from the wizarding world on site trying to determine what had and was happening. It was one of the healers who noticed that his second set of convulsions just so happened to coincide with moonrise. Not hard to do for the healer once they knew their patient was a werewolf and that the full moon was due back at their home. Luna had decided early that summer to synchronize her moon's phases with that of the Earth's moon, so it was a full moon she brought up. Once the connection was made between the moon and Remis being a werewolf, word was sent to Canterlot. Luna was quick to respond, and for the first time in millennia, Equestria, and the rest of their world, had a moonless night. No doubt there would be complaints from the neighboring countries about the royal sisters playing games with the celestial bodies, again. It was another hour before Remis settled into a deep slumber that appeared to be natural. The doctors discussed waking him, but decided it would be better to let him wake naturally. If he woke up at all. In the meantime, the wizarding healers cast spells and dithered over the results. They showed Remis to be a normal wizard, but they weren't sure if the spells were performing correctly in the magical environment of Equestria. Having the moon pop up and down like a yo-yo was not normal, as far as they were concerned, and who knew what that would do to their moon-based spells. It wasn't until the next day that Remis sluggishly rolled over and weakly said, "Where am I? What happened?" He stared at the doctors, healers, nurses, friends, students, and princesses. Princesses. They stared back from the other side of the reinforced glass window separating the quarantine room from the observation room. After getting a drink and taking a few moments to finish waking up and gather his thoughts, he said in answer to their questions, "All I remember, is stepping through the portal, seeing the sun low in the sky, and then a pain that encompassed my whole body had hit me, and I guess I just collapsed to the deck." He frowned. "I remembered briefly opening my eyes, later, but I almost immediately overcome with pain once more." The doctors then told him of what had happened, and what they had done. On hearing that he had gone into convulsions when Luna rose the full moon, his eyes shot wide open for a moment. He should be a werewolf, right now, not a pony. He tightly shut his eyes and frowned as he thought. "I can't feel the wolf," he suddenly exclaimed. "He's gone. There's nothing there." Sirius, and several of the students, were gobsmacked. "Are you sure? No sign at all?" "Maybe it's in a deep sleep," one of the healers said almost in sync with Sirius. The healer then moved to casting their diagnostic spells, again. They all returned the same answer. Remis wasn't a werewolf. Except for Sirius, his visitors headed for home. It had been a long, sleepless night and they were exhausted. Remis, on the other hand, had had a good night's sleep. Much better than anything he had managed as a werewolf on a full moon night, that was for sure. He spent the rest of the day in the quarantine room, probing his mind, trying to see if it was a trick and talking things over with Sirius. He also spent some time adapting to walking on all fours. While the werewolf was based on wolf-like attributes, werewolves spent most of their time on 2 legs, not 4. Partway through the day, the healers and doctors came to him and told him what they thought had happened. Equestria does not have wolves. Dogs, yes. Timber wolves, yes, but timber wolves were magical plants, not animals, now, weren't they? Cerberuses, yes. But wolves? No. That had been responsible for his first collapse at the outside of the portal. His new body, a unicorn, had tried to adapt to the problem of being magically required to transform into a non-pony at some point. The animagus, the witchery ability to change to another animal, was not available to ponies. His unconsciousness had been the result of his magic and body working at that problem, attacking each other viciously, trying to drive the other out. Or, perhaps, merely subjugating the other. No one knew. The full moon rising, which should have triggered a wizard-to-werewolf transformation on the other side of the portal, came into an immediate conflict with a unicorn's nature of not being able, innately, to transform to another shape, to be an animagus. Ponies simply don't have that native ability. The werewolf curse tried to use an ability that wasn't present. The werewolf curse, though, now had to devote part of its magical energy towards accomplishing that transformation. The unicorn magic just continued trying to evict the foreign curse. If not for the full moon that night, who knew what the unicorn's magic might have come to as an accommodation? Perhaps it would have kept the curse subjugated as a potential problem that didn't need a solution. The full moon, though, in the midst of the conflict, had required a complete resolution. Wizards and witches have the ability to transform into a specific animal as a part of their nature. Those wizards and witches that are infected with the werewolf curse have their animagus form replaced with that of the werewolf. Otherwise, those wizards and witches infected with the curse would have an animagi form in addition to the werewolf, and they don't. Even if they had had an animagus form before getting the curse, after getting the curse they only had the werewolf form once a full moon. The werewolf curse, on the night of the full moon, takes advantage of the witchery animagus ability to force the wizard or witch to transform into the werewolf form. It traps them like that until sunrise by submerging their reasoning ability. The curse replaces their reasoning with rage at the humans who had done this to them. Which spread the curse, if the wizard or witch don't isolate themselves in time to prevent them from hunting down and attacking the humans they hated with such passion. Ponies don't have the animagus ability. While they do have spells to transform into other creatures, they don't have an innate ability to do so. In Remis' case, the curse tried to force a change with a magical ability that didn't exist in the pony. It had destroyed itself in the ensuing fight with Equestria's unicorn magic. They verified the curse was gone the next night, when Luna rose a full moon as a test and Remis had failed to react at all. They had even let him out of the room into the grassy area that fronted the hospital. He had spent hours staring at the moon and stars. Then, the next morning, he and Sirius had gone back through the portal and went to the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Once there, they went to the Werewolf Registry of the Beast Division to perform the official check on his werewolf status. After 3 tries, the last by an unspeakable, the department head was forced to conclude he was no longer a werewolf. The next full moon on that side of the portal, only a few weeks later in July, would be conclusive proof that he wasn't a werewolf. Sirius got Lyle Lupin, a member of the council in charge of the department, to agree that an official statement to that effect would be published in the Daily Prophet, and a letter officially declaring his status as not a werewolf would be issued at that time. Had he, inadvertently, discovered a cure for the werewolf curse? It was painful, true, but not nearly as painful as the transformation into a werewolf was itself. He spent the remaining weeks of July back in the wizarding world contacting a few of the more trusting werewolves and telling them what had happened. Because they knew he had been a werewolf, yet the werewolf detection spell now indicated he wasn't, they were willing to give it a try. The explosion caught them all off guard. The unspeakables were quick with their magic shields, as were Headmaster Dumbledore, Princess Twilight, Magical Law Enforcement Department Head Amelia Bones, and the 3 Aurors that were with them. Fortunately for Harry, Twilight's shield covered both of them. However, they were all still momentarily blinded by the flash. Dazed, Harry sat up from his new position on the floor. He blinked furiously, trying to see what had happened. His ears were still ringing when Harry's eyes started to recover from the brilliant blast of white light. The room slowly emerged from the white fog that seemed to surround him. He took a quick look around to see if anything had been damaged. They were in a large, rectangular, dimly lit room, with a sunken circular stone pit in the center about 6 meters deep, just like before. So, they hadn't been transported to anywhere else, which is what probably would have happened if they had been in Equestria. That was just the way his and his mum's luck worked back home. The pit was lined with stone benches and descended in steep steps toward a raised stone dais at the bottom. On the dais was a freestanding ancient crumbling stone archway. The archway appeared to be hung with a tattered black curtain. The curtain was fluttering very slightly as though it had just been touched by a faint wind, the explosion not even disturbing it. The air in the room was still and cold. As Harry's eyes recovered and he began to recognize more details, everything in the room looked exactly as it did before, except the people were half-crouched and blinking in reaction to what had happened. There was no sign of the box he had just thrown into the veil. The unspeakables had been in the room for at least an hour before he had arrived, making unspecified preparations. Harry, and those accompanying him, had arrived only a few minutes before the explosion. As the adults had planned a month ago, the headmaster Dumbledore and Twilight had brought Harry directly from the Weasley homestead to the so-called Death Room, where they had met the Unspeakables, the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and her Aurors. He who must not be named, also known as Voldemort but actually named Tom Marvolo Riddle at BRTH, had been captured by Dumbledore and Twilight in a tremendous battle weeks ago. They had kept his spirit. The wizard he had been possessing had died in a special spirit trap in the headmaster's desk. They had had to wait this long because they had wanted to make sure that they had destroyed the things that Tom Riddle had created to ensure his survival after death, his immortality. Those horrible items, called Horcruxes, anchored him to this plane. As long as one of them existed, he would be held back here. The hunt had been difficult, but they thought they had destroyed all of the monster's soul anchors. The Gaunt family ring was the first, Slytherin's locket and Hufflepuff's cup were second and third. Ravenclaw's tiara was fourth. They believed that Lord Voldemort had rendered his soul into 5 pieces, counting himself, a magically powerful number. Harry's desperate parents, knowing that the evil wizard wanted to kill their son because of a prophecy, had used old, ancient, nearly forgotten magic to create a protective spell for Harry. When the evil wizard had tried to kill the helpless infant that fateful Halloween night, that magic had reflected the wizard's killing spell back at him, instead. Unfortunately, his spell had accidentally fractured his soul a 5th time, making 6 pieces, when it did that. To avoid dissipating, as it should have, that piece of soul had latched onto Harry as the only living thing close to it. Weakened by the attack, the protective spell from his parents couldn't eliminate the intruder, but it had prevented that soul piece from harming infant Harry. Ironically, the soul piece had been accidentally destroyed by a magic-consuming villainous centaur in Equestria, Tyrek, over a year ago. Now, with all his anchors destroyed, they had thought they could safely pitch the box containing Lord Voldemort through the veil. The Unspeakables believed the portal led straight to World of the Dead, and that someone who went through the veil would be forever trapped in the world of death. Well, at least, nothing thrown through had ever come back. Some people, Harry had been told previously, could hear voices from behind the veil. The Unspeakables claimed that the voices were the whisperings of the dead, trying to talk to their still living loved ones. Harry was one of them, he had discovered on entering the room. The urge to go closer, that maybe it was his parents trying to talk to him, had been powerful, indeed. He could almost make out the words he heard. However, Twilight, his adoptive mother, was right at his side. She had put her arm around his shoulders to help him resist the temptation. As planned, Harry had cautiously approached the veil. After a quick look at his mother, who nodded, he had tossed the box in an underhanded throw at the curtain in the archway. He had been confident that evil Lord Voldemort would be no more. The explosion had occurred at the very instant the box had touched the non-corporeal curtain. What happened? Harry said hesitantly, standing up, still blinking and rubbing his eyes. I'm not sure, Twilight said, just as hesitantly as she, too, regained her feet. She looked around suspiciously. Based on the lack of debris, I think that either the box has been destroyed entirely, or it has gone through the veil. Copying the unspeakables and the headmaster, she, too, began to cast spells trying to determine what had happened. After several minutes, she sighed and looked over to the headmaster. Well, the spells sealing the walls against spirits seem to be intact. And my spirit detection spells merely cause the arch to glow. Which they did when we first came in here. One of the untouchables nodded in agreement. I guess the explosion was the result of the spells on the box coming into conflict with the veil's curtain. She worried her lower lip for a moment. Perhaps spells can't cross the boundary. Or, at least, those spells can't. She shook her head and frowned worriedly. I can't detect any signs of Tom Riddle's soul in the room, though. She sighed and stared at the arch. That thing is so magically bright it's hard to tell. Again, one of the unspeakables nodded his head in agreement. There are permanent spirit detection spells in this room, he said. His despondent tone made it sound like he was disappointed at that fact. Should it have remained outside the veil, and escaped our detections at the moment, the instant it tries to move from wherever it might be hiding, we will know it. She nodded her head. There is the distinct possibility, too, that lacking the soul anchors, unless it can possess something soon, it will just fade away, anyway. The unspeakable nodded a third time. I believe that Tom Marvolo Riddle, also called the Dark Lord and Lord Voldemort, is no more. It was her turn to nod, as did the headmaster. I agree, Dumbledore said. He smiled at Harry. A job well done, my boy. The prophecy is fulfilled. Tom Riddle, the self-styled Lord Voldemort, has been vanquished by your hand. Harry wasn't so sure, but let himself be reassured. He smiled up at his mother. She was still worrying her lower lip and looking around the room with narrowed eyes. He could tell she wasn't nearly as confident as the headmaster. She slowly turned and headed for the exit. Harry followed her off the dais. The untouchables wandered around the room and continued casting spells. Princess Twilight, Mr. Potter, Miss Bones said as they approached. I don't believe either of you have visited the ministry before. Would you like a tour? That is an excellent idea, said Dumbledore. Twilight was here, briefly, regarding Mr. Sirius, but she didn't see much more than a quick glance. Harry sighed heavily. Wizards. Can't live with them, can't live without well, actually, he could live without them. Much as he might want to hex them, he was a good pony. He glanced up at his mum and smiled. That took care of the rest of the morning. While superficially interesting, after the fourth office that looked exactly the same as the others, Harry was ready to go home. Unfortunately, as Twilight had told Harry before they had left Equestria, part of the mission for the day was to make a production out of showing that Harry was not leaving the witching world. As a result, he was introduced to every department head and given a tour of each department. Somewhere along the line, a photographer had appeared. Every department head, and every self-important employee who could browbeat his supervisor, had his or her own personal photograph with Headmaster Dumbledore, Twilight, and Harry. The only bright spot was meeting with Mr. Weasley. The wizard was in a bit of a rush, though. He was still settling into his promotion from the misuse of Muggle artifacts office to the improper use of magic office. With the equestrians on the scene, the decrees on the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery and the International Confederation of Wizards Statute of Secrecy were going to get quite the workout. Not to mention that the department not only had a bigger staff, but had also been given a sizable increase in budget, too. Unfortunately, Mr. Weasley was an easygoing manager. Even the janitor succeeded in sweet-talking Arthur into letting him get his picture taken with the famous boy who lived. Before they were halfway done, Harry could feel his hand twitching to pull his wand from its holster. He was getting a headache from resisting the temptation. That, and his face was hurting from all the smiling. On the other hoof, the lower-level employees were always so grateful he felt like a fraud. He really hadn't done anything. It had been his parents. He was starting to feel a bit resentful about the whole thing. Stupid wizards. Minister Fudge, and his undersecretary, the pink blob, as Harry dubbed her, were not pleased at being left to the last. However, Mrs. Bones pointed out that portly wizard had far better things to do with his time than act as a tour guide. He was somewhat mollified when she told him that the photo of him with Harry Potter, Headmaster Dumbledore, and Princess Twilight would be on the front page of the Daily Prophet. Harry didn't like being a political toy. However, the princesses had given him the illusion that he could say no, and that they wouldn't bring up the subject again if he did. As if. Harry thought he had met every employee in the ministry by the time they left. On the other hand, he'd never have to go through that again. Twilight and Harry returned to a very quiet Weasley residence. Molly was in the kitchen, preparing lunch for her brood. The twins, she explained, were in their new building opposite Arthur's work shed. They spent most of their time working in their new laboratory and supervising their 2 employees. The employees were fulfilling the many orders for their products in the witching world, while they worked on perfecting the processes for mass-producing Sweetie Belle's other innovative discoveries. Percy had locked himself in his room. Based on his ink-stained fingers, he was apparently writing the next bestseller novel. Ginny was stretching her wings over the family Quidditch half-pitch. Ron was in the orchard exploring his new, green, magic abilities. After greeting Mrs. Weasley, Twilight declined her invitation for lunch and popped off to the embassy. While her schedule had allocated enough time for the trip to the ministry, that hadn't prevented a backlog of work piling up for her in her office there. Harry looked around the sitting room. He had been with his family in Equestria for the last several weeks, and hadn't visited the Weasleys since Easter. The room looked quite spiffy, he had to admit. The shabby and worn furniture had been replaced with new. The walls, ceiling, and floor had been given a good once-over, as well. The new wallpaper and rugs made the room bright and cheerful, and the fireplace fairly gleamed. The twins' new income had gone a long way to improving their lives, he could see. Ron would no longer have to make do with hand-me-downs. For anything. Of course, that didn't include the few gemstones the Phillies had shown the Weasley brood how to collect when they were visiting Equestria earlier that summer. Ron, himself, had a sizable nest egg as a result. Well, he decided, he might as well take a look outside and track down Ginny. He hadn't seen her in several days. She was one reason Twilight had suggested visiting the Weasleys. The other was, of course, so he wouldn't be underhoof, as Twilight put it, while a birthday party was prepared for tomorrow. It left him feeling quite strange to know that someone was preparing a birthday party for him. It was while he was headed for the Quidditch pitch that a house elf popped up in front of him. For a moment, they eyed each other. The creature was barely as tall as his waist, had large, bat-like ears, and bulging green eyes the size of tennis ball. It abruptly bowed so low that the end of its long, thin nose touched the carpet of grass that covered the ground. Harry noticed that it was wearing what looked like an old pillowcase, with rips for arm and leg holes. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 46. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author tkepner on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.